Everybody, how we doing? Welcome to the first inaugural episode of the BlockFi Live Athlete Series. By way of introduction, I have myself, Brian Bodner, who sits on the private client side of the equation here at BlockFi, and we also have not only NBA champion Matthew Dellavedova, but perhaps more importantly, BlockFi investor as well. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. So just to jump right into it, why don't you tell us a bit about your background, coming from Australia? How did you get to the NBA?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small country town called Maryborough. Everyone played all different kinds of sports, but I always loved basketball. At the age of 16, I moved to Canberra, to the Australian Institute of Sport, which is the best training facility for Australians. They try to train Olympians in all different kinds of sports. So I did my year 11 and year 12, or junior and senior year of high school there, and then got recruited to play college basketball at St. Mary's in California, where I went for 4 years, got my degree in psychology, and then managed to get on the Cleveland Cavaliers roster despite going undrafted.
And so much of the story around Bitcoin and crypto is obviously it's global, it's decentralized, borderless, etc. Do you think that your experience living and working in multiple countries, has that helped shape your view on the space at all?
I think it's just helped educate me, and I've had to learn a few more things around finances and I guess world economies and with the exchange rate between Australia and the US, that's, another aspect I've had to learn more about and follow pretty closely. So not so much on the Bitcoin side, but more so just in general world finance.
Cool. And so those who are casually listening in who may not be aware, but especially within the NBA circle, you're known as somewhat of a savvy investor. You have a pretty deep VC portfolio. So given that kind of background, why did you first become interested in this space, and kind of why are digital assets attractive to you relative to some other asset classes, kind of given the overall landscape of how things are today?
Yeah, so I mean, I have financial advisors over here, and have tried to learn a lot from them, and they help me out with a lot of different things. My dad back home has been into property and some different things, so he and my mom have tried to educate me on that back home. So I try to learn as much as I can. And after I signed my deal in Milwaukee, my financial advisors were talking about having an allocation to venture capital, and I wanted to learn a lot more about what that was. They introduced me to a few people. I met a few people, through Twitter and just searching for things online. And before you know it, you've built a bigger network over time. And so it's something that I've tried to be a lot more hands-on with and really just try to learn as much as I can while I'm still playing. So I've probably been doing it for about 4 years now, and have invested in different people's funds, invested in syndicated deals, have invested directly a lot more the last couple of years. And then I've also set up a syndicate on AngelList and have syndicated a few of my own deals on there with the goal of going more into venture capital full time when I'm done playing, which hopefully isn't for quite a while.
Love to hear that. So as part of that, you mentioned your podcast as well, the Delhi podcast. Would you mind, by the way, everyone go listen, it's great. Content we're going for here, sports, business, crypto, investing, all that. Go check it out. But would you mind elaborating for our viewers kind of what took you down that path as well, and how you balance those kind of diverse aspirations between podcast, the VC, obviously you still have a great NBA career going on. How do you kind of balance those three things, and how do you kind of compartmentalize them?
Yeah, I think, they can all complement each other. And I think obviously podcasts have exploded the last 4 or 5 years, and then especially during the pandemic. And it's something that I'd thought about doing for a while. But during the season and having a family and plus playing the NBA, you don't have that much time. But have had a lot more time with an extended off season, and thought if I don't start it now, I never will. And it's just something that I wanted to do to be able to talk to interesting people and be able to pick their brain, and hopefully, show other people some interesting things that I'm looking at, and be able to learn from some cool people.
That's great. It's really cool. As a sports fan myself, obviously, you've seen this kind of growing narrative, I guess, where you have your podcast, you kind of talk about these types of things. You see Kevin Durant in the boardroom. LeBron touches on some of it within like the barbershop, some business discussions on there. It seems like a lot of athletes today are really concentrating, kind of leveraging their brand and discussing these kind of new business streams, with like basically using their celebrity, their status, get some more deal flow, some more insight, all that. That being said, is this something that you guys kind of talk about in the locker room? Is this like when you're in the Cavs locker room, you guys are talking business with each other, different deals, some new ideas, maybe crypto, kind of like, is that something that goes on in the locker room today?
Yeah, I think it's something that's happening more and more. And I think obviously, players get paid a lot more now than they did 5, 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's a really important thing to learn. And, you obviously hear about the horror stories that can happen to athletes. And I think the NBA does a great job of trying to help educate the players on the do's and don'ts, and what you should know. And I think also within locker rooms, the veterans try to help out and educate the younger players. And if they have questions on not only just on the basketball court about plays and, different things like that, taking care of your body, but also off the court stuff, whether it's family stuff, finance stuff, business stuff. I think there's a lot more conversations going on. And I think obviously everyone was reading about the Golden State Warriors players getting more into venture capital. LeBron is obviously a savvy businessman and has a lot of things going on. And players are reading these types of articles and wanting to get in and learn more themselves.
Does Bitcoin ever come up in those conversations?
I think more and more. Obviously, when it had the big run up, I think it was in 2017, it came up a lot. Not so much since then, but I think obviously we're not in the locker rooms right now with the season being done, but I think there would be a lot more conversation happening when we do come back into that locker room environment.
As we're recording today, for those listening, it's flirting around 12,000. So maybe we'll get those kind of runs up soon and get some more chatter going on. So so that being said, who's your favorite players to talk about these types of these business discussions with?
I mean, there's a lot of guys that have a lot of interesting different things going on. Pat Connaughton is big into real estate. A lot of guys are into venture capital. Before I knew about venture capital, when I had the experience to play with LeBron, I was picking his brain, sitting in the cold tub, and he was always awesome with sharing, different things that he was doing or how he looked at different deals. I think that was around the time the Blaze pizza deal happened. And to be able to learn from obviously one of the best on the court, but also off the court with what he's doing was a great experience.
Cool. We're definitely going to have to touch upon LeBron before we finish this up later on, just because obviously there's some pretty big news with LeBron in the past couple weeks or so. But we'll get to that later. So cool. So that being said, for those who don't know, as I mentioned earlier, we had the pleasure of Delly partaking in our Series C funding round. So that being said, what kind of drew you to BlockFi specifically?
So I'd been doing a fair bit of research on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and due to the just whole financial world since the pandemic, I followed it pretty closely. Obviously, having a lot more time on my hands, and obviously saw the stock market shoot up despite the job losses that had gone on, and then the amount of, I guess, money printing and stimulus kind of led me to look at gold and precious metals and things like that, which then led me to Bitcoin, which led me to Pomp. So I did a lot of research on that. Spoke with Pomp, and he was super helpful to just pick his brain and get his perspective on where he sees things going in the future. He told me about BlockFi, and then got on a call with you and Zach, and asked a lot of questions. And obviously, you guys have had crazy growth, but I think to have a asset that I believe is going to continue to go up in value, but also be able to earn a very healthy interest rate. You're not finding that yield anywhere else right now. And I think a lot of people are, reevaluating their portfolios and looking at their allocation specifically to bonds, and just, beginning to question, is that, the best spot to have a sizable allocation when, I think when you look at the budgets that cities and states are running at, they're at pretty big deficits.
Makes a lot of sense. And shout out, Tom. Thank you for the intro to Delhi in the first place. So shout out there. It's great. Everything you said is very, very on point there. Cool. So also on that note, in the crypto space, obviously you have players like Spencer Dinwiddie, who's talked about tokenizing his contract. He did a GoFundMe for Bitcoin, trying to decide. Didn't end up, I don't think, quite working out as he had initially planned, but deciding his next NBA destination. Matt Barkley back in the day mentioned getting paid in Bitcoin. You seem to have a number of athletes now who, along with yourself, are taking this pretty seriously as a new form of currency, and are all going as far as wanting it for their contracts. What are your thoughts on kind of developments there? Stuff happening with the NFT deal that I believe it was Andre Iguodala, Spencer Dinwiddie, and some others came about with recently with Dapper Labs. What are your thoughts on kind of these evolving thoughts within the space?
Yeah, and Spencer's one I should have mentioned before. I actually had him on my podcast recently and asked him about, trying to tokenize his contract and things like that. And I think that was something that was, pretty misunderstood after talking to him. He's just launched his own company as well as his own venture fund, and he's deep into the space, and he was really interesting to talk to. As for people getting paid in, Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, I don't see any major leagues doing that in the near future. But I think you'll continue to see players, exploring it more, asking their financial advisors about it more, and trying to learn about the space for sure.
Yeah, totally. I think what Spencer is doing is, or I'm not sure where he's at with it right now, but with the tokenization of the contract, it's a pretty brilliant idea when you think about it, where it allows him to kind of recoup the value up front. It allows fans to essentially gamify the NBA, where they get a piece of the players and kind of more direct interaction with those players. So if you're a big fan of Matthew Dellavedova and you want a piece of Delly's contract, you can kind of directly benefit from what Delly does in the court. And it's a pretty cool thing where it kind of is mutually beneficial for both the player and the fan.
I think, obviously the league had, a different perspective on it, and it is something that is completely new. But I think, he had some healthy conversations there, and it's going to be interesting to see what continues to develop in the future. And I think fans do want, more interaction, more involvement in players' careers. And, I've recently made a couple of investments in a fantasy sports league, Underdog Fantasy, which has had pretty crazy growth. Star Stock, a sports card marketplace. And that's another aspect that has really grown, where you can, buy your favorite player's sports card if you believe they're going to have a great season or a great career. And I think that's another market that continues to grow.
Totally. You do seem to be seeing a lot more kind of with sports collectibles, like sports memorabilia, sports cards, kind of having a resurgence, it seems like, where it's having a ton of value popping up in the crypto space, especially with like what some of the NBA guys and Dapper Labs are doing. There's that piece of the NFT the non-fungible tokens, which maybe is something that can kind of play a part in this resurgence of value in those sports collectibles. So it's pretty cool to see that unfold.
Yeah, and I think it's going to continue, heading more. I think we're going to see more digital things pop up, and I think it's something definitely to follow. And it's cool to see sports cards, I guess, have a bit of a resurgence. I remember collecting them as a kid, and obviously there's a lot more access to them over here than there was growing up in Australia. But it's a pretty cool thing.
Do you have your own basketball card?
I do actually. I got a couple from Panini where they do a deal, I think, with pretty much everybody in the league where you sign a certain amount and you get to keep a couple, which is pretty cool.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Cool. So that being said, like I mentioned earlier, Bitcoin, pretty big week for Bitcoin specifically. It's teetering around 12,000 as we're recording this. Crypto adoption has obviously come a long way over the last 5 years, where you're now starting to see, along with BlockFi, some other really reputable companies in the space. Some are getting banking licenses. There's a real financialization and infrastructure push in the space. So it's really cool. Maybe we get another kind of the next step of this bull run as we head into this unforeseen macro landscape. What do you think will be needed for the future adoption of Bitcoin and crypto over the long term?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not a financial advisor, so don't take my financial advice at all. But I've been trying to look at it and figure it out as well, because obviously, a lot of things have changed a lot since the pandemic. Whether it's working from home and people moving out of cities to financial stuff and the US debt and how and when and if that will kind of get repaid. What happens to Bitcoin? And I think for it to continue, I guess, to be adopted, a lot of people I talk to wonder when it's going to be available where they can buy it easily. And I think is it Grayscale where people can kind of invest in a fund. I need to do a bit more research on that, but I think the more easier access that people have, obviously it will continue to grow, but I think a lot more people are talking about it, and it takes a little bit longer to do your own research, but there's a lot of great resources out there on the internet, whether it's Twitter, YouTube. And I think that's another thing that's changed is that there's so much great information out there that is current. You just have to search it and find it out for yourself. Podcasts are another great option.
Definitely. If you saw me laughing at the beginning there, I thought you were going to say people are always asking me when is it going to make the new all-time high. I have friends and family who are always asking because of me, I can't stop talking about it. They ask me, they're like, well, when will it reach the new all-time high? And I was like, well, I can tell you exactly when that's going to happen, and I would love to let you know. But I started laughing there. Cool. No, that's all great. It makes a lot of sense. Totally aligned on that front. And for those listening who are unfamiliar with what Grayscale is a trust you can invest in on the primary market for accredited investors only, but there's also a secondary market for anybody to invest in, where you can basically get indirect exposure to different underlying crypto assets, including Bitcoin, Ethereum, and some others.
That's really interesting. I think obviously, people in the Bitcoin world have seen what Michael Saylor did at MicroStrategy and what Square have recently done. And I think as more and more companies, buy some Bitcoin to have as a company's reserve asset, the more people that recognize those companies, the more comfortable it's going to feel for people to, make a small purchase and try to continue to learn about it.
Totally. And when you hear Jack and you hear Michael Saylor talking about it, they basically frame it as them investing in Bitcoin and moving away from cash is in their view, a conservative bet rather than like kind of a risky bet when they look at kind of the assumed devaluation of cash and the hardening of Bitcoin over time with the fixed supply. They look at it more so as a conservative way to protect their wealth rather than like a get rich quick kind of thing that I think a lot of people associate Bitcoin with.
Yeah, and I think Michael Saylor is a great one to listen to. He's done a ton of podcasts recently, and I think I've tried to listen to most of them, and just him going through his thought process and even going asset class by asset class to what were the positives, what were the negatives, why he ended up coming to Bitcoin and basically deciding to go all in on that. I thought was really interesting because, I mean, I've, looked at, real estate, I think is still probably a good option, but there's a lot of risk there, especially if you leverage, you need to be in the right location. And then obviously I looked at Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, totally. And there's people, while I think the general narrative is Bitcoin is digital gold, I think you have some other people who kind of are framing it as Bitcoin is digital real estate due to the scarcity of it and the true ownership of it versus some other assets where you don't really own it, like the bank might own it or the exchange might own it or something, whereas Bitcoin, as in real estate, when mortgage paid off, et cetera, you truly own the asset, which can't be said about many other asset classes. Well, cool. Before we wrap this up, I gotta ask, your former teammate LeBron James just won his 4th NBA Finals and Finals MVP. Sorry, 1 second. You obviously played a crucial role in helping him bring a championship to Cleveland. Gotta ask, how does that latest accomplishment shift anything in the context of the all-time greats, and maybe one specifically?
I mean, I obviously didn't see, any MJ on TV or anything growing up in Australia. Obviously, I watched The Last Dance and things like that. But LeBron is definitely the greatest player I've ever played with or against. And what is just, I think, incredible to me is just how he continues to get better. Year 17, 35 years old, and he's still the best player by far. And I've seen the work he puts in on his body, on his game, watching game tape. And that's why he just continues to get better and better. And I'm excited to see, how long he can keep it going for, because the way he's playing, he can play at this level for quite a few more years, I think.
100%. And it's pretty crazy. I remember seeing the pictures through the quarantine before the bubble, and LeBron was getting some gray in his beard, like a little older, and then he just steps on the court and it just looks like he's 25 again, and it doesn't make a difference.
And he's seen every defensive coverage, every situation in a game thousands and thousands of times. So he knows exactly what he's going to go to. And, everyone obviously talks about his physical gifts, but his basketball IQ is, off the charts.
It's all time. It's insane. Cool. Any questions for me before we kind of wrap this up?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been mentioning to friends and family that they should do some research and look at Bitcoin. And then if they do, to look at putting some of it with BlockFi, obviously disclosing to them that I'm an investor. So I'm biased, but I love what you guys are doing. When people deposit their Bitcoin at BlockFi, the question I get most is how can they pay that interest rate? And, obviously you guys have to lend or give access to the Bitcoin to other people to generate that yield for the investors. Can you explain how that process works in a easier fashion so I can explain it to friends and family?
Absolutely. So at a high level, the way it works is you deposit on BlockFi, you're effectively lending it to us. And then we lend it out on the other side for a higher rate. So when we lend it out, we obviously need to lend it out at a higher rate. And so I think a great data point in general is on cash specifically, people say 8.6% right now in cash. It's unheard of. There's no bank, no money market mutual fund you can get that kind of rate at. How do you do that? I think a great data point is our standard retail loan is 50% loan to value ratio and a 9.75% interest rate. So right there, you can see that our interest rate is higher than that. That being said, the vast majority of, not the vast majority, but most of our lending is on the institutional side. And so here we're lending to market makers, prop trading funds, some hedge funds, family offices, et cetera, people of that echelon. And most of the time what we're looking to do is capture the volatility in the market and usually taking advantage of different arbitrage types of situations. With Bitcoin and crypto being still relatively immature and there's a lot of volatility, there's a lot of easy, kind of juicy arbitrage opportunities available. And another way of looking at this is if you go to another traditional bank today and you want to collateralize, you want either cash or stable coins or crypto, mostly you want stable coins collateralized by Bitcoin. You can't just go to a standard bank and ask them to borrow, say, hey, here's my Bitcoin, can I borrow cash? You can't do that. So it limits one who has that capability. It's us and a couple other firms. And that allows us to kind of charge more consequently. And then the same thing for there's a limited source of people who have the Bitcoin to lend out, and we have one of the largest balance sheets in the space to lend out those assets.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And then what about one question I had, before I was investing is, well, that's great. But what about, in March when there was that huge drawdown of, I think it was over 50%? You guys didn't lose a dollar, right?
Yeah, no, we've had zero institutional losses to date. And we actually, in the aftermath of March, had, if for people like you who are obviously aware of kind of what's going on the inside, that kind of serves as a major catalyst for BlockFi specifically, where we were really the only liquidity providers open for a period of time there, where there was certainly a lot of chaos and definitely wasn't business as usual for us. But because of the contingency plans we had in place ahead of time, it allowed us to navigate that time fairly well. We took on a ton of new business on the institutional side in the aftermath of that because of the way we handled it. So it's been great. Obviously, since then, we raised our Series C because of kind of all the progress that came from that, which you were a part of. So in many ways, while it was a kind of a stressful week, it really helped bolster our business in the long run.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And Delly, where can our listeners and viewers find you once this is done?
Yeah, on Twitter or Instagram at Matthew Delly, Delly. I've got a YouTube channel, the Delly Podcast, available on Apple for any accredited investors who want to take a look at some startups. I have a syndicate on AngelList as well.
Awesome. Twitter, YouTube, AngelList. Go find him. Check him out. Thanks so much for having us, Delly. It's great to catch up again.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much.